Once upon a time, there lived a woman who vowed to marry from a very wealthy family. Her name was Chin, and she only dated men who she believed were extremely rich. Not just rich, but filthy rich. Chin made it a duty never to date a man who came from a poor family. She didn't care if he was rich or not, because she believed that men of this caliber had so much responsibilities on their hands and would end up being poor in the nearest future. She wanted a man whose family had generational wealth capable of satisfying up to their fourth generation. Chin craved this level of luxury and was not willing to compromise for anything in the world. How can a homie end up with a poor, wretched payer? She said to a friend, who laughed and reminded her that her family was poor. There's nothing wrong with being poor after all your family is poor, you said to Chin, who reminded her that her mentality was the reason why she was married to a poor and wretched man, a man that has no money to buy an abandoned car talk, more of a new one. How do you feel living with a man who you feed at times with your little salary? He works for a rich man, yet he lives like a beggar. Why can't he steal from his boss and take care of you? He's forming holier than thou, yet he has nothing to show for it. If not that we have been friends since we were kids, I won't be caught dead, breathing the same air as you, Chin said to Yu, who felt offended by her words. At least I'm not ashamed of my family, Yu replied, Chin angrily, as she advised her to change her ways. You can't continue to borrow money from people to fund your lifestyle. This house you're living in is not even your own. So why are you acting all high and mighty when you are as poor as myself? She said to Chin, as she angrily picked up her bags and left the house. Chin stood there as she reflected on what Yu had just said. Her mother was a poor market woman in the village, and CH had done everything to disassociate herself from her poor family. She warned them never to come to the city because she could not stand people finding out that her family was poor to those around. She was the daughter of a very wealthy man who lived abroad with the rest of her family. She borrowed money from several people just to be able to afford her rent. The car she drove belonged to a married man who she slept with whenever she needed a car. He owned a car dealership in town, and Chinwe only kept him because of the cars that she got from him. Chinwe lived a life full of lies, hoping to attract a wealthy man who would take her out of the life that she so desperately despised. Every detail of her life was carefully curated. Her clothes were rented and her jewels borrowed. Chin believed that if she pretended long enough, she would eventually find herself in the arms of a wealthy man who would fall for her carefully crafted facade. One evening, whilst Chin was returning home from work, she received a call about an exclusive party that was slated for the weekend. It was strictly by invitation, and CH knew that she had to be there. She quickly made inquiries about the invitation and was told to pay a huge sum of money for it. However, she had no such money in her account. She tried borrowing from a couple of friends who refused to lend her any money, owing to the fact that she owed them huge sums. Already, Shim had to be at this party and was willing to do anything to attend with no money at hand. She began to think of what to do in that moment. Chim received a call from her brother in the village that their family house had just floated. Chinu thought of an idea to raise the money. So the next morning, she set out to the village, hoping to actualize her plans. When she arrived, the village, she met her old mother, who had just returned from the farm. Chin pretended to be saddened by the recent flooding. She convinced her mother and brother to hand over their family land documents to her for safekeeping, citing the recent flooding. Chin promised to keep the documents safe in the city, and her mother, being so old and naive, handed the documents over to her, trusting that she would keep it safe. What she did not know was that Chim had other plans for the documents. She planned on using it to secure her place at the party. Chin was so delighted that her plan worked. She returned to the city and began to make plans for the party. She approached her friend Gina to borrow her some wigs and clothes, promising to return them after the party. Chinu could not risk anything going wrong at this point. After all the money that she had spent on the evening of the party, Kimi arrived in venue like royalty. She looked extremely beautiful, and the men could not help but stare, head turned as she entered the venue. Her confidence radiating like the morning sun, Chin carefully scanned the room, dismissing the married men who seemed to approach her. Her eyes finally settled on a man who stood quietly by the bar. He was tall, strikingly handsome, and dressed in an impeccable tailored suit. His name was to be, and he was the heir of one of the West families in the country who recently returned from living abroad. Determined to catch his attention, Chim put her charm into overdrive. She approached him and introduced herself to him as the daughter of a very wealthy man who lives in the UK. Chimmy made up several convincing stories to prove to Toby that she was rich. She even went as far as faking a phone call to her supposed father, effortlessly painting a picture of a privileged woman whose family owned estate overseas. Toby seemed intrigued by her story, but remained cautious, speaking little about himself as he allowed Chin to do all the talking. However, as the night wore on, cracks began to form in her facade. To was no fool, he noticed inconsistencies in her stories and grew suspicious when Chin failed to answer certain questions about her supposed family business. Just as they stood there talking, a young woman walked in and took him from her. Chin could not believe her eyes. She watched as to be gently walked off with the woman who turned out to be his girlfriend. She was so furious to see him with another woman. Shin had invested so much into this party and was not willing to back down. Now she made up her mind to marry, to even if it was the last thing that she did. Filled with so much anger, Chim sat in the corner alone as she drank up her glass of champagne. A waiter who seemed to be serving drinks at the event caught sight of her and decided to ask for her number. Chinu could not believe her eyes. She looked up at him, disgusted, reading all over her face, as she asked if he was mad. "You must be mentally deranged to think that a woman like me would ever stoop so low to talk to a POA like yourself." Chin was spat, her voice dripping with disdain, as she asked him a question he never saw coming. "Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea how far beneath me that you are a common waiter? It's your audacity for me," she said, as she warned him never to come close to her again. Days passed, and Chim strategized on how to win Tob's love. He was her only ticket out of poverty, and Chim was willing to do anything to have him. She stopped his every movement, visiting places she believed he loved. Chinu even went as far as attending his church, just to be in his presence. She made herself noticeable, dressing in the finest clothes and sitting strategically where to be would always see her. However, none of her efforts seemed to catch his attention. Toby was so devoted to his girlfriend Indy. He loved her so much, and Chinu became frustrated by their relationship, unable to bear the frustration any longer. Chim decided to do something about it. She hired a private investigator to dig into her background, hoping to uncover his scandal that would lead to the end of their relationship. After weeks of searching, the investigator returned with little to no data on Indeed. She was a well-respected woman with a clean reputation, but Chin was not willing to give up. Just yet, she decided to plan death on Indeed since there wasn't death on her already. Chin was willing to play Deceit. She could not risk to be with another woman and knew that she had to do something about it. Just as she stood there contemplating on what to do, Chin decided to plant false messages using a second phone to text to be anonymously claiming to be someone who had evidence of his girlfriend's infidelity to be was initially skeptical. He began to feel a pang of doubt, which was finally crushed by some doctor images showing IND in the arms of another man. To be confronted IND with the photos, but IND denied the accusations. Vehemently, he loved Indeed so much, but couldn't ignore the mound evidence that the Chinu had fabricated. Their once loving relationship grew strained, and eventually, Toby decided to take a break to clear his head. Chin was so delighted at this. She saw this as her opportunity to finally win him over. So she began to spend more time with him, inserting herself into his life under the guise of comforting him. Chinu brought cooked meals for him, planned outing, and showered him with so much attention. Yet, despite her efforts to remain distant, he was polite but never reciprocated her affections. And Chinwe grew frustrated by this. One evening, while at Tob's house, Chin leaned in and confessed her feelings to him. To be sensing her desperation, pushed her away. I warned her never to try this with him again. But Chinu was relentless. She forced a kiss on him, hoping to send some form of emotions to be stepped back from her. His face filled with disgust and disdain, but Chin refused to give up. She confessed her feelings to him again, saying that his girlfriend did not deserve him to be ignored. Her completely. But his suspicions of her began to grow. One afternoon, Chim's mother arrived to B's house in search of her daughter. She had come to the city in search of Chimi because a group of strangers paid a visit to their village claiming ownership of their family land. Chim's mother was so desperate to retrieve the land documents, she arrived Chin's house and was told that Chin was currently at Tu's house. Chinu could not believe her eyes. She caught sight of her mother at the gate and rushed out to meet with her. "Why are you here, Mama? Do you want to ruin everything that I've worked so hard to build?" She asked her mother, who went on to ask about the land documents. Shiwi, on hearing this, fled up in anger. She dragged her mother to the back of the house, away from prying eyes, and began to yell angrily at her. "You're nothing but a poor, wretched woman." She hid. "Do you know how much I've sacrificed? You can't ruin this for me." Before her mother could respond, Chim shoved her mother into the trunk of her car. "Stay there until I'm done," she ordered, as she walked back into the house, hoping that Tu didn't hear the altercation. She met Tu preparing to head out for a meeting, and CH informed him that she had to go. She got into her car and drove out of the premises with her mother, carefully tucked away in the trunk of the car. Shin could not risk anyone finding out that her mother was poor. They arrived home, and Chim chastised her mother for what she did, revealing that she had to return to the village immediately. "You can't stay here, Mama," she said, as she informed her that they had to leave for the car park immediately. Jin Wei's mother did all she could to retrieve the land documents, but Chin blatantly refused to return them. She dismissed her mother's pleas, assuring her that the documents were safe. With her heart broken and defeated, her mother sped the bus back to the village. In silence, she could not believe that her daughter would send her back to the village. By that time of the day, Her heart was so heavy with worry, knowing that something was definitely wrong. Later that evening, her best friend Yu came visiting and met her with fuming in anger. She asked what the problem was, and she narrated how her mother almost hard things for her. At To's house, you could not believe her ears. She could not believe that Chinu made her mother ride in the trunk of her car because of a man. How wicked could you be to treat your own mother in such a way? She asked Chin, who dismissed her concerns as unnecessary. Didn't I tell her never to visit me in the city? What was she expecting me to do? Choose her poor, wretched self over my rich and handsome Prince Charming? She asked. Oh, who shook her head in disappointment as she spoke. Chim, do you hear yourself, this man? You are chasing what has he done to end this level of loyalty from you and your mother, your own mother? What has she done to deserve this level of cruelty from you? Chin glared at her friend. You would understand, would you? I have sacrificed too much to let anything or anyone, even my own mother, bring my plant. If you can't support me, you know where the door is, she said to Yu, who was now visibly disgusted one day. Chim, you will look back on all this and regret it. You can't build a life based on lies and wickedness. Mark my words, your actions will come back to haunt you one day with that stormed out of the house, leaving Chinu alone with her. Thought the next evening, Chim arrived to Ba's house dressed in one of the beautiful dresses that she had rented. She saw the smile on Tob's face when he caught sight of her and knew that she had finally won him to herself. They sat at the table for dinner, and Tobe could not take his eyes off her. Chinu could feel her heart raised as to be asked her to be his woman. She could not believe her ears. Her plans of finally being with a wealthy man was now becoming a reality. Chin. We boxed in the luxurious life that B had provided for her. She moved into his mansion, attended exclusive events, and enjoyed the admiration of her peers. Chinu proudly flaunted her relationship with to be feeling as though she had finally secured the life that she had always dreamed of. One evening, to be introduced her to his family as the woman that he planned on marrying, Chin could not contain her excitement. She sat there, imagining what her life would be when she finally becomes his wife. All the luxury that she stood to gain made her stomach flutter as Chin watched his family accept her as one of their own. She sat there in awe as to be announced to his family his plans of hosting a grand engagement party to celebrate their love. Chinu was so ecstatic. She imagined the glamorous event, picturing herself in an expensive dress, surrounded by the elite of the society. This was her moment, and Chin made up her mind to make a statement, to be made all the arrangement himself. And Chin was so delighted to have a man who treated her like a queen. Her friend Yu heard about the engagement and called to congratulate her. She hoped that Chin would invite her for the event, but Chin revealed to Ju that the event was not for poor people. Only the rich can attend, she said to Yu, who could not believe her ears. She hung up the phone, and Chin's words continued to echo in her mind. Yu broke down in tears, regretting all the sacrifices that she made for Chinu in the past. She remembered how she used all the money she had saved to bring Chin out of the village to the city. You remembered how she shared her little apartment with Chin and gave her money for food and even helped her take care of her father's burial bills. You could not believe that the same person that she had sacrificed so much for had now turned her back on her. She shook her head in disappointment, vowing never to associate with Chin again. Just as she sat there, Her husband returned home looking so excited. The man he had worked for almost 12 years died and left a substantial portion of his wealth to him, who stared at her husband in disbelief. Her husband smiled at her and he held out a letter in his hand, who quickly took the letter from him and began to read its content. It turned out that Muram, the man who her husband worked for, died and left away in it be instructions giving her husband access to a mansion, some landed properties, and billions of naira. Uju's hand trembled as she read the contents of the letter. She could not hold back her tears, realizing that their sufferings were finally over. Faith had finally smiled down at her at the time when she least expected it, at a time when she was being mocked by her best friend for being poor. Meanwhile, Chim backs in the euphoria of her newfound status. She talked down on anyone who she believed she was better than, and even began to beat up her unprovoked. Chinu could not hide her disdain for poor people and showed it at every opportunity. The day of the engagement finally arrived, and it was everything she had imagined and more. The venue was lavishly decorated, the food exquisite, and the guest list filled with prominent figures. Chinu walked into the venue wearing a dazzling dress that Toby had picked out for her, her head held high as she basked in the admiration of everyone that was present. Chinu felt like royalty in that moment. Tu's family were all present, and Chim reveled in the attention that she was getting. Her heart swelled with pride as she imagined herself becoming a part of this powerful circle. The ceremony finally began, and To took the microphone to speak to the guests. He thanked everyone for coming and spoke about how much he loved and valued. Her chin beamed with joy as she watched Toby shower her with praises in front of the crowd. He gestured toward a lasgri behind him, which he said was a special gift to Chin. The lights dimmed as the video began to play for all to see. Chin, we sat in shock as she watched herself in the middle of the busy market arguing over the price of second-hand clothes. She wore a taut dress and a scarf that barely covered her hair. The crowd murmured in shock as they watched Chin's true background unfold before their eyes. Chin way froze. Her heart pounded as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. She turned to Tob, who ignored her completely. As the next clip began to play, Chin saw herself yelling at her mother as she shoved her into the trunk of her car. The final blow came when Tu invited Chin's mother and brother on the stage. Chin's mother, who was frail and old, clutched her son's arm. As they approached, the entire room fell silent as to be addressed. Chim's mother in front of the crowd. Mama, I invited you here because I believe you deserve to be honored, not hidden away in shame. To be honored her in front of the crowd, promising to care for all of her needs. He then turned to Chi, who stood there paralyzed and unable to speak. You thought you could fool me easily, he said, revealing that he knew who she was from the start. You lied, man, manipulated and betrayed everyone, including your own family. I wanted to show you that no matter how high you climb, the truth will always bring you down, he said to Chin, who watched as Indi strolled into the hall in an extremely beautiful dress. You thought you were so smart to break us apart. What you did not know was that Indi and I, we are always 10 steps ahead of you. To be said with a smack on his face, as in the join him on stage. Chin's world shattered in that moment, as Indi's presence confirmed that she was nothing but a pawn in their own game. We knew about your schemes. Chin Indi did it, began her voice. Calm, but cutting every lie you told, every core act you committed was recorded to show the world who you truly were. Chin's knees buckled as she tried to hold herself up for much longer. Tears poured down her face as she looked at the people who once admired her, cast disgusting glances at her to be turned to her, his voice laced with cold detachment. You thought you could use light and desperation to trap me. But I wanted to show you what true shame looks like. This engagement was never real. It was a stage for your own reckoning to be gestured towards. Indan said, "This is the woman I will marry, a woman with integrity, grace, and honor." Chinu, seeing that she had been defeated, tried to plead to reconsider. "Toby, please, I will change. I'll do anything. Don't just leave me like this," she said to Toby, who didn't even spare her a glance. He turned to the security and guards to escort Chinwe out of the venue. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Chinwe was led away, her once confident stride reduced to a defeated shuffle. She had no choice but to leave with her head hung low, the weight of her humiliation crushing her spirit. Lessons from the story. 1. Truth always prevails. Lies, no matter how well crafted, will eventually be exposed. Authenticity is always better than living a facade. 2. Greed leads to ruin. Chin's obsession with wealth blinded her to what truly matters, ultimately leading to her downfall. 3. Value family. Neglecting loved ones, as Chin did with her mother, often leads to regret. Family deserves gratitude and respect. 4. Character over wealth. Tob's choice of Ndidi shows that honesty and integrity hold more value than material possessions. 5. Karma is inevitable. Chin's actions came back to her in a humiliating way, proving that negative deeds have consequences. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share what you learned in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales like this one. Thank you.